All right, welcome everyone. Today I have Mandi Freger with me, and today is day 18 of the Autism Awareness Month series of videos. So before I let Mandi do a presentation about autism and energy psychology tools, I would like to introduce her, read her beautiful bio here. So this is Mandi's bio. Throughout her career, Mandi has served in multiple roles within many service lines of behavioral health treatment, including acting as a supervisor in both outpatient and residential settings, in providing decades of psychotherapeutic treatment to various populations. She has gained extensive experience with those with autism spectrum disorders. Mandi was one of the initial candidates to obtain the behavioral specialist license, as well as status as a certified trainer in functional behavioral assessment in Pennsylvania, with an emphasis on autism spectrum disorder treatment planning. She's also a licensed professional counselor in Pennsylvania. Mandi was the first director of autism services within an affiliation agreement with Cleveland Clinic Children's Hospital to bring its model of autism services to southwestern Pennsylvania, which included overseeing a licensed private school and a diagnostic center. Originally trained in energy psychology techniques, EMDR and TST, test DXTM, to treat trauma, mood and pain disorders and learning challenges, Mandi has been using a variety of energy-based modalities with children, adolescents, adults, and staff. Mandi is a former board member and education chair for the Association for Comprehensive Energy Psychology and holds diplomat status in comprehensive energy psychology. Mandi currently hosts the talk show, The Energy of Autism, on Fridays at 12 Eastern, 9 Pacific, on Bold Brave Media Global Network, and her website is www.mandifreger.com. Welcome, Mandi. Thank you for doing this. Thank you for taking the time and sharing your knowledge and wisdom with the audience. Thank you.
Thank you for having me. So today, as you and I talked, I'm going to explain a little bit about energy psychology, but oftentimes people ask me, how do we use this with kids who are diagnosed with autism spectrum disorders? And my response to that is it's very complicated, and one should be trained and experienced in even using this with people who are not diagnosed with autism spectrum disorders. So let me first just clarify a few things about my background. As you mentioned, I am a licensed professional counselor, and I've been trained in applied behavior analysis. So I've been a behaviorist for years and years. And I was actually first trained in energy psychology practices for use with pain management and anxiety and depression. And then I started to work in the realm of autism spectrum disorders and treatments. And most of my experience in working with kids, adolescents, and adults who have been diagnosed through the years with autism has been with applied behavior analysis, and it's a very successful treatment. So when it comes to energy psychology, people are saying, what can we do? What can we do with the kids? And again, as I said, it's complicated. It should be very individually based. It's not something that one technique necessarily can work for other kids, all the kids. But what I have found, interestingly enough, through the years, that caregivers can be parents or teachers or counselors or therapists who are working with this population, their energy has a tremendous impact on the kids. And how I discovered this and why it became so interesting to me was when I was the director of an autism program, and I oversaw staff there, and these were mostly bachelor's level staff who had graduated from college with degrees in education or psychology. And it was a very intense center-based program for treating kids who were more profoundly affected with this disorder of autism or autism spectrum disorders. And it was a very intensive program, and many of these children were nonverbal, as we say, or did not have significant language or communication strategies. So this was a very it was an intense program. There were a lot of behavioral demonstrations that looked like aggression, as we might call them, or comprehensively lump them into that category. And the staff who wanted to be at this center and do this job were very good. They had a very high, what I call, desire to be in this place of work. But one day I noticed that there was some sort of low energy in the building, and I approached them as a group and I said, what's going on? And basically they said they still love their job. They were very good at their job because they were trained very well in applied behavior analysis. And they said, well, I'm going home after work or and engaging with my family or my friends, and I have very low energy, and I just don't feel like I used to. And again, I just want to emphasize the staff were doing a fantastic job at work, and there were no performance issues across the board. It was a very good program. And so I said to them, I said, let's try one thing if you're willing to do this. And they knew that I did energy psychology techniques, that was sort of a love of mine. We did not implement this with the students, but I gave them a breathing exercise to try over an 8-week period. And they did it 3 times a day. And we did just a little informal pre-assessment and a post-assessment at the beginning of the 8 weeks and after. And what we had found was the quality of their life and the energy levels after work had greatly improved with one exercise. And this was an energy psychology based exercise. So this led me to really sort of think, let me say this too. When the kids would have behaviors in the center, when the staff were doing these exercises in this 8-week period, they began to realize that, when I have a thought or when my energy is somewhere else, I notice that the child is having maladaptive behavioral demonstrations. And they insisted that they influence that. They said, I know when my thought goes here, the behavior happens. And interestingly enough, they took full responsibility for the behavior. It's my fault. But what they learned was how impactful their thoughts and feelings when working that closely with a child really impacted them. And we began to see patterns with this, that it wasn't just 1 or 2 staff. All of the staff felt the same way. And I started to think, this has to be true for caregivers and parents especially. Parents spend, of course, much more time with their children than we do. And we had them 30 hours a week, but still. So I thought, well, let me try to conceptualize this. And I got my license as a professional counselor, and I left the program to be an outpatient therapist. And this is what I'm doing now, is helping parents and caregivers with these types of issues. Because in a nutshell, what we found that when we're around someone, and I kind of say this to my new clients that I have, when we're around someone that's in a good mood, sometimes we feel like, oh, that brings our mood up. And when we're around someone that's not in a good mood, kind of makes us crash. And we think that energetically that there's really more to it than just a person smiling at us and, well, that changes everything. And I've recently stumbled across some of the research that I believe supports this. And I've had it under my fingertips for a long time, but have never really put it together. And I like to reference this concept of what us in the energy world called our biofield, which is the electromagnetic field around our bodies, as having influence with one another and with whom we interact. And I like to attribute a lot of the science basis to this, of the research that's out now, to Dr. William Tiller, who is a Stanford physicist, and he's written a few books. His first was Science and Human Transformation, and the second was Conscious Acts of Creation. And I think that there was another one in there also. But in Conscious Acts of Creation, he talks about what's called this bio-bodysuit metaphor. And it's very complicated, and there's a lot of physics behind this and a lot of calculus formulas. But for those of us who just want to know the practical application of this, what he's basically saying is there's innermost layers of ourselves where our thoughts and emotions influence our persona and how we radiate basically to those around us. So I think that it's beautiful that we're finding that there is some science to this now, and it's not just a thing that we've kind of all had some suspicion about and realized that this works for us. So what I'd like to talk a little bit about today is I try to conceptualize this a little bit for those of you listening to break this down and talk about when we're working with a child who's diagnosed with autism. Again, whether you're a parent or a clinician or just someone who's taking care of the child, that there are factors that go into the best care possible for this child and with respect to our energy. And there are three components that I like to talk about, and two of them are very traditional in organizational psychology and the workplace. And one is, how well does that person have a good skill set? How good is their toolbox? If we're talking about working with children who are diagnosed with autism, I mentioned applied behavior analysis, which is the most well-researched interventions for this population. And I know some people think that, ABA can be very harsh, but really what ABA is using reinforcement-based protocols, trying to find what's motivating for the child and working within that framework to change behaviors that really shouldn't be harsh. There are some pretty extreme behaviors that, take some different type of well-researched techniques, but I'm not going to talk about that today. So skills, or what do I need to do to be able to give my child or provide to this child what they need? The second component is desire. How much do I want to do this job? And sometimes in the organizational psychology world, we call this will. How strong is the will to want to do this? And this can be a range from, some people will say, some people are just lazier will, or, will in the fact that there's some other maybe more serious things going on with a person that disables them from engaging at the full will to do whatever the job is. So it can be anywhere in between in that spectrum. So skill and will, or skill and desire, are the two factors that, again, we hear in different organizational psychology frameworks about doing the best job that you can. The third piece that I add to this is what I call biofield strength. And I don't know if strength is actually the right word, but just for the sake of explanation, we'll call it that. And that, again, is how our electromagnetic field around our body, how our thoughts and emotions and all of that inside us that we don't quite understand yet affects these two things and the people around us. So I have a chart that I use, and I'm going to try to talk about it. It's a little bit difficult to do it orally. It's much easier for people to see. But I'll kind of break this down a little bit. And if you have any questions or people would want to contact me after, I'm available by an email. I do present at the Association for Comprehensive Energy Psychology Conference. Every year we have one coming up in May. I think it's May 2nd through the 5th in New Mexico. And I do talk about this pretty much every year because I think it's really important for therapists, especially who are at the bulk of these conferences, to understand and be able to implement, because we can't meet the need to provide for this population. So the first type, so there's 8 types of personalities, I call them, with this combination of skill, desire, and biofield strength. And I'm going to talk about the types of personalities and what the residual result is, what we see happen practically when one of these things are high or low. So the first type of personality would be someone who doesn't have a skill set. They have a very low skill set. They're not trained very well. They don't have tools in their toolbox. And again, this could be for various reasons, just because they're new to this and just don't have the knowledge yet, or just don't have correct or accurate knowledge. Anything in between. And then the person may have low desire. So someone who, again, doesn't want to do this type of work for whatever reason. So they have low skill set, they have low desire, and they have a low biofield strength, which means that thoughts and emotions may be confused, conflicted, not at that person's optimum, affecting this field around them. So when we have a person, again, working with the population who's diagnosed with an autism spectrum disorder, a person who doesn't have a strong skill set, who doesn't have a high desire to be doing this type of work, and this sort of low biofield strength or low energy, if we want to say, this is not an effective blend. And most people listening, I'm sure, can understand that quite easily. I'm not trained to do this and I don't want to do it, just those two things alone. But the field also is not effective. The second type would be a person who has a low skill set, who is an untrained person, A person who has a low desire to do this type of work, I may not want to do it, but a high biofield strength. And this may come across, and this is just one example of and this is just my opinion, of a person who might have a high biofield strength. This might be someone who's very confident, who's very aligned with their beliefs, whatever they are, but very confident, and they sort of radiate this kind of stability. But this person does not have a skill set. They don't know what they're doing. They're not sure they want to do it, but they're pretty confident. So I kind of call this personality type, hey, I'm game, right? I'll try this. You can teach me. I don't know if I'm going to like it or not, but I'm confident I can learn. I'll try it. So this type of person eventually, and this is the suspected effectiveness level that I talk about. The first one was not effective. The suspected effectiveness level for this type of person, I believe, would be at risk for making emotionally driven choices. And then they're at risk for weakening this field. And why I say that is because if you think about yourself, and any time that you've gone into trying a new task or learning something new, sometimes we have insecurities. Are we doing this right? We're going to make mistakes, but it doesn't feel so great, especially if it's something we don't want to do or aren't sure if we want to do. So this can create a bunch of insecurities in us, which even if we were confident, about we can try this and learn, it might start to shake that confidence, which might kind of affect our field and our thoughts and inner emotions, which might weaken the field. So we're making emotionally driven choices based on our feelings of insecurities, which eventually I believe will sort of weaken this field. So the third type would be a person who has a low skill set, who is untrained, who has a high desire. I really want to do this type of work, and a high field strength. So confident, and I want to do this. This is a person who I am born to do this. I can learn to do this. This is my calling. I'm going to do this. As much as this might seem like this may be a very trainable person on the surface, this person also may be at risk for making emotionally driven choices. And what can happen here, again, if you've ever tried to learn ABA is a science, and it's also an art. And it's very complicated, and you will make mistakes, and there are subjective choices you have to make. So even if this person is learning, there's again, some insecurity when we're learning a new task, that if it's becomes so complicated, I just really wanted to help this population. And this is way more complicated and difficult than I thought this was going to be going in, learning the skill set, trying to work in a program, or even a parent trying to work with a provider that might be coming in the home to teach them new skills. This is way more complicated than I ever thought this could be, right? Just saying that alone creates an energy of, uncertainty, which again, might lead us to making emotionally driven choices. And again, we're at risk for weakening this field around us. And I think that parents experience this type a lot, right? Because you get a diagnosis, you realize that your child has this disorder now, and then it becomes, okay, what's next? I need to do whatever I need to do. And I talk about on my show that parents, I think, feel a sense of urgency, and there's a time frame to learn skills, how much we need to get, and then school sort of plays out that time frame for the parent. Okay, we need to try to be school ready, learning readiness, get through elementary school, then the curriculum is going to get harder. Do we have these skill sets? So there's always this sense of urgency and time frame, and when things aren't maybe happening as quickly, or you feel like you're missing a tool as a parent, I see that this really can happen. And then there's some energetic weakness that starts to happen, and some pretty significant feelings, a little bit different maybe from an outpatient caregiver. The fourth type would be a skill set that's low. Again, a person who might be able to be trained, a person who has a really high desire to work with this population, but a low or not so strong of a biofield. And this type I call the sweet grandmothers, who just want to come in and I just want to fix you. I want to give you a cookie and make you feel better. So this type also is at risk for making emotionally driven choices. And I've seen this with staff who have attempted to work with this population who don't understand the extent of ABA, and that everything may not feel good. And that is part of, as Dr. Fred Gallo said on my show one week, part of the human condition, that, life isn't always good. And, sometimes the things that we're implementing are not comfortable for the kids. So this type of personality can start to feel really bad about that, coming from an emotional place, not being able to take a step back without the skills to understand and say, listen, what we're doing is really going to help this child in the long run. Even though it doesn't look great and the child's crying right now, they're going to learn something. So this type clearly is at risk for making emotional driven choices. And this is, we talk a lot in energy psychology about coming from a heart center and having heart-centered treatment, but this is a person who may have an overactive heart chakra, and we need a little bit of work to balance that with the practical tools that are necessary to work with this population. The next type is a person, so we're going to shift gears now to the people who do have a high skill set. So this would be a person who has a very high skill set. They're very trained. And again, I'm just referencing ABA for the sake of this conversation, but a low desire to do this type of work. So I'm a really great behaviorist, but really don't like doing this type of work. And a low biofield strength. So I'm already kind of not crazy about this. Other things may be going on with me too. This type of personality, I say, kind of going through the motions, right? You can do the job, but sometimes when you find people in this demographic, they feel like, that they're kind of asking what's their purpose. And this can be a very draining type. It's one of the most draining types, I think, because this really, again, of course, it's going to leave this person at risk for making emotionally different or difficult or challenging decisions, but it also raises a lot of questions. I'm really good at this. I don't like what I'm doing, and my energy isn't very grounded potentially. And so from an energetic standpoint, this type really needs some work. On the surface, again, it seems like there's a high skill set. This might be a great person to interact, but if we look at the subtle energy, there can be some interesting dynamics going on. The next type is a person who has a high skill set, very well trained, a low desire to be doing this type of work, but has a high or a strong energy field. And this is the person that I can do this job better than anyone, but I hate it. And this is another interesting demographic where it appears on the surface there's a confidence level and there's a skill set that it's unmatched. Somebody who's very, very good at this. This also can weaken the biofield. Think about it. If you're going to a job that you hate every day, the scary thing to me about this type, I think, is the most at risk. And again, this is just my observations. The most at risk for becoming frustrated and potentially angry. And this is a tough dynamic when working with this population anyway, because behaviors can happen that are pretty intense and aggressive, destructive, and that frustration level can go up pretty quickly, even if there is the high skill set. And that can be a power struggle, quite frankly, with this population, that I know what I'm doing, you need to listen, I'm not going to take no for an answer, which is not an ABA protocol necessarily, but it can go in that direction when you have this mix of a person. The next type is, again, one of the most interesting to me. This I kind of call the perfect type on paper. This is a person who has a high skill set and a high desire to do this type of job. But here's where the subtle energy comes in. And most people who are not energy therapists in different organizations would not recognize this, that this person has a low biofield, or it's not strengthened, or there's some emotional turbulence going on, or some indecision with other things that are really affecting other parts of their life. So again, on paper, perfect employee, right? They can do that. They have the skill set, they have the will and the desire to do this type of job. I also think that the two that I mentioned is the second that can be the most potentially draining. And again, it's deceptive on paper. But if this person is struggling with other things, chances are that emotional stuff that's going on in the other realms are affecting the skill set. It's affecting the desire. Their mindsets might be somewhere else. And this is kind of what was going on with my staff a little bit. They wanted to be there. They had the skill set. They were worried and stressed out and tired. So their presence was somewhere else. And so you can see, if you really think about this type coming from an energy lens, why this might be the most draining. And of course, the last type is what I call the master. This is the person who has a high skill set, a high desire, and they have a really nice balanced energy field around them. And this is what you want to shoot for. So with this all being said, and to sort of wrap up this conversation, what I advocate strongly for is the use of energy psychology tools. And specifically for me, I use mostly meridian therapies, EFT or thought field therapy. They're both great therapies for caregivers, parents, and people who are working, whether it's clinicians, with this population, to work so that they can attain this level of mastery where they can be working on finding the skill set that they need with whatever professional, and it is with me sometimes when they come to me because I have those skill sets for their child. Obviously if they want to be doing the type of job, but to really help their energy field sort of stay level, because when we're interacting with someone, there's an exchange there, and our thoughts and feelings, again, we have our own layer of that going on, but it's kind of like a Venn diagram. When we come in contact with someone else or a crowd, there's potential for exchanges there, and we just don't really understand all this yet. But we do know that energy psychology can help build some of that resiliency, so that when we're exposed to something that's not so pleasant or negative, we can sort of bounce back a little bit better. And these strategies do take time. This isn't a quick fix. I know a lot of people out there will market that, oh, we can do some tapping and, things will go away relatively instantaneously. And that might be so for the common person, for the common problem, but we're not widgets. And I would emphasize working with a trained professional in either of the therapies or another energy psychology tool. But I really want to say and emphasize today that caregivers are really, really important. It's kind of like when you get on the airplane, right? They always tell moms, put your oxygen mask on first before you put on your child's, and your instinct is to protect your child first. So caregivers need to stay well in order to be able to provide the best care. So I hope that this was helpful. And again, my recommendation would be for caregivers to seek out a professional who's qualified in providing energy psychology treatment to help, especially those who have kids or are working with those diagnosed with autism spectrum disorders.
Thank you, man. This is wonderful. I really liked when you said about the oxygen mask analogy. Initially, when I started doing these videos the first week, that's the same example I gave for the audience, because that's what we're doing by using, energy psychology tools, basically taking care of our energy, whether you're a caregiver or a therapist or a parent or, anyone who is helping a child or an adult on the autism spectrum. So I have one last question to ask you. So do you see what is the potential of presenting this energy psychology tool to schools, organizations, and where children, therapists, and caregivers are getting trained to help children on the autism spectrum? Do you see what is the potential of having these trainings offered at all these places? That's something I'm interested in. Just wanted to know your thoughts on it.
Yeah, I think that if we're talking about the kids, I think some of the most interesting research being done now with kids, and this is not with kids who are diagnosed with autism spectrum disorders, but with respect to school implementation, has been done by Dr. Peta Stapleton, and she's from Australia. I don't know if you've heard of her, but she's a member of ASAP and is affiliated with our organization. But she's done lots of research within the past few years to show how this has been supportive and helpful for kids in the public school settings in Australia. So I think that she's a great reference for that. I think that it's complicated. I think that public schools, I will say this, and I've been saying it, or in America anyway, I'm not familiar with systems outside of the US, and mostly in Pennsylvania because that's where I am, are very overwhelmed. We can't meet the need for treating this population. There's more and more kids being identified and diagnosed. And I'm not going to go into reasons potentially why, but if you think about the number of kids today who are entering the school system or being diagnosed in their first couple of years with an autism spectrum disorder versus 20 or 30 years ago, we just haven't been able to meet the need and catch up. And I think public schools are doing the best that they can. Private schools are emerging to be able to help with this. But I think it's a slow process. I think even if we talk about energy psychology, 20 years ago, it was considered woo-woo. And now, I know ASAP has been accepted by the American Psychological Association to provide continuing education credits because we have the research now to show that a lot of these techniques work for different mental health disorders. So I think time and technology will tell, but I think we're on the right path, and it's coming slowly. And a lot of individual practitioners are, spreading the word and doing what they can locally with their schools and organizations to help.
Thank you so much, Mandy. That was so wonderful. I'm going to, pause the recording and just have a word with you after this.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me.
Thank you.